All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to round number 3 of our Worlds Collide tournament. This time we're going to have Dermis, Space Oddity, Pops Your Socks, and Cubit on the screen. Dermis, Space Oddity, and Pops Your Socks actually been competing against each other a lot today because of how seeding has panned out. And now they've been stuffed in to compete with Cubit this time. So we're just going to have to see how things go. Cubit could be considered a bit of a favorite by most people, but he's more of a 1v1 specialist than an FFA expert, so we have to say that pretty much anybody could take this one this time. Pops Your Socks already coming up with a victory earlier today is definitely something to be keeping an eye on. Alright. Everybody has managed to get founded at this point. Cubit was our first to found with a fairly large amount of debt, expansive in the corner, going to get a hold of the best iron tile, it looks like, on the map. A reasonable decision, I would say, although quite early found. He's also got a geothermal vent fairly close by and is mixed in with all those, high waters in the area. Hopefully he'll manage to get a hold of some of that. Meanwhile, Space Oddity has trying to make scientific work with just a quick little triangle of water. We'll have to see what she can do moving forward this game. She also founded quite quickly. Pops Your Socks, ignoring the iron situation, gonna let everybody else try and sort that out. I don't know how that's gonna work out for him, although with steel starting very expensive, it may end up being okay. He's taken some iron fairly far away from his base, not a huge amount. He's never gonna have great access to it. But he's going to be focusing mostly on steel as a robot to try and push to HQ2. Very difficult push for him this game. Robots usually don't struggle that much to hit HQ2. They do it fairly rapidly. But with steel being so expensive this game, that wasn't really an option. What he has done is set himself up kind of near the silicon. He's got aluminum nearby, unlike anybody else this game. That's going to be a nice boost for him, even though he doesn't need very much of it. And he does still have decent access to water. Even as a robot, water can be used to make money, of course. He's got a high and a medium nearby. Definitely going to be looking at that. I think I really like Pops Your Socks' position this game. Especially the fact that he's gone robotic. I really like that decision. This game's looking a bit awkward already, and being able to avoid all of that life support debt is definitely going to be useful for him moving forward. Dermis did manage to get to HQ2 on the back of his triple steel mill iron. We already have a lot of claim purchases going on this game, just want to point that out. Everybody struggling to get upgraded quickly because of the expensive steel, which always tends to lead to quick claim purchases if they are available. Now, iron is what's turning out to be expensive very quickly, which shouldn't really come as a surprise to anybody. Space Oddity has managed to secure 3 steel mills separated from her base. Unfortunately, I think Space Oddity made a bit of a mistake in which tile to claim first in this area. I would have liked to see her take the high tile first. Even though it's separated from your base, you take the high tile away from everybody, and they're far less likely to compete with you for the other low tiles when they can only take one. If they can take both, that's a bit unfortunate. Things have turned out awkwardly. But you're kind of forcing them to either give you the triangle or completely take it away from you, rather than just ending up in this awkward pair situation where they still have that full high water pump available. I have to say, slant drilling I expect to be potentially competed over this game. There is just not a lot of water on this map, and 3 of our players are going to be consuming life support. So that's definitely something they're going to have to be watching out for. Cubit has managed to get into a decent position in terms of what tiles he has with these iron. He's managing to get a geotherm up, and he was the one to secure that high water pump next to Space Oddity's territory, and that's all nice for him. But I'm very concerned about how early he founded. Already being $70,000 in debt, he is going to need to get to 3 very quickly. It looks like he's getting there. He should be relatively close. Only about 6,000 away from actually finishing it up. It's mostly the aluminum, as talked about earlier, that's causing him a problem. But it is something that he is going to have to do reasonably quickly. He wants to get out of this C range. Push that up to B before the interest tick hits, and that's exactly what he's going to manage to do. Very important, I think, that he pulled that off. Meanwhile, Pops Your Socks is just being a robot off in the corner without life support debt. even with these steel mills active and shipping this iron this ways, he has managed to push to 3 solar panels due to the nearby silicon that he had. One of these was initially a silicon quarry, you'll remember. That's managed to make him enough money that he has also pushed HQ3. And I think that's going to set him up very nicely long term. He's also choosing, he's got a spy down, attacking Cubit's geotherm. And the response from that is going to actually be Space Oddity trying to power surge those solar panels. Hitting them during the night, still potentially okay when you're hitting them with such a long effect, but unfortunately with that solar panel down, the freeze isn't going to end up being all that effective. And Space Oddity, with that interest tick, has now fallen into D levels of debt. Definitely going to be problematic moving forward this game for her. She's going to need to get some kind of power online to recover from this very, very quickly, which unfortunately means pushing the HQ3, which she can do now. And we'll just have to see what our players who are lagging behind can do to kind of catch up this game. Dermis, I'd say, is still in an all-right position. He's been a little slower going this time, but he hasn't acquired a huge amount of debt. On top of that, he's pushed into a fair amount of aluminum. Interestingly enough, chose to go for 2 high tiles in separate locations rather than just a high and a low next to each other. Not sure exactly what the logic for that was. It's possible there was an auction for an aluminum tile that I didn't pay attention to because there's way too much to talk about that could cause that decision, but I don't think there was. Maybe it was. There was a tile auction for 16,000 here. It was this auction for the aluminum tile. That makes sense. Dermis not going to necessarily be happy to see that so late after he had already selected another aluminum tile, but still, aluminum coming in very effectively for him is nice because our other players were avoiding it for an extended period. Now that everybody's gotten into it, I'm not sure that auction for Dermis was actually going to have been worth the 16,000 that he paid for it, but at least it wasn't a claim taken away from him, and that's always going to be good. Geothermal auction is interesting. Pops Your Socks looks like he's going to be the one to get a hold of that. No, Space Oddity is actually going to be the one to take it. Excuse me, for 20,000. Not sure about that decision from either of those players. It really seemed like Dermis was the one who would really want that geotherm tile, potentially. He's only got one thus far. Taking another for 24,000 could have been reasonable. Oh no, he does have 2. This one's just mutinied away. Guys, try keeping up with an FFA when you're not even playing it. It's ridiculous. Still though, a bit of an odd decision for Space Oddity. 20,000 debt. Yes, she needed power production in a lot of ways, but unfortunately, power's already well on the way down. By the time this gets constructed, look, it's going to have to fly all the way over here, then actually get built. That's going to take forever. Doesn't even have the resources that she's started it just yet, I don't think. Yeah, like, not a whole lot of resources. Oh, here it is. Here's our little ship. Slowly making its way across the world, but still. By the time this comes online, look at this power price. It's already down to 120. Going to be going back up during the nighttime as our solar panels have been disabled, but not going to be hugely beneficial. And you have to just look at how much extra debt she's going to be gaining when this interest tick comes in just a moment. So let's watch and see. Everybody else in A levels at this point. Space Oddity, unfortunately, down in D. That's $40,000 of debt she just acquired. And a significant amount of that extra debt because of the 20,000 auction. That's left her in a very awkward position and could potentially push Pop Your Socks to go for a quicker buy on her unless she can pull herself out of that. Now, we've already seen one player earlier today come back pretty massively in Steph. Excuse me, Steph is one of our 2 players who has won 2 rounds thus far and is tied with DT at 9 points. He managed to push very successfully and recover from a very large amount of debt. We've already seen that this game. So we're going to have to see if Space Oddity can pull that similar kind of miracle, or if everybody else is going to get aggressive, going to make sure to shut down that kind of recovery from potentially knowing what happened earlier today. Now, everybody else has managed to push to HQ4 at this point. Pops Your Socks with the hacker array down, hacking chems up already. An interesting decision, could work out pretty well. Unfortunately, Pops Your Socks is also consuming a large amount of chemicals from his patent lab, so that's a little bit counterintuitive that he would go for both of these things at the same time. Not sure I like the decision completely. but I do at least understand it. Nobody else is in chemicals at this point, but without a laboratory to support this, it is all just a little bit awkward at the end of the day. And we'll have to see what he can do to utilize that moving forward. He still does have a rather massive cash advantage right now, despite having put up 2 advanced buildings. He still has no debt. Power is still valuable enough that he's pulling in plenty of cash from that. It will be crashing out pretty effectively as time continues to go on, unless our players move into significantly more power consumption. But I'd still say that even though he's got a slightly, counterintuitive move going right now, maybe not the best idea to be hacking the resource that you are actively consuming consistently, this could still work out very well for him long term. The underground nukes have started to fly. One right onto Pops Your Socks Silicon Quarry. That's going to knock it down to a low. Of course, he can very easily expand in a manner that gets him a lot of other silicon production. So yeah, it sucks to lose the high and have it drop to a low, but he'll be able to work with it, I think, this game. Space Oddity trying to move into some silicon of her own. I don't know if anybody else has silicon just yet. It looks like Dermis has actually taken a fair amount, and you have to say, this has to be a lot of fuel consumption going on with these players. If we look at Dermis, he's consuming almost 3 fuel a second. Pops Your Socks has equal amounts of fuel consumed and produced at this point, it looks like, with the double electrolysis reactor into the triple chem refinery. And then Qubit, how much fuel are you consuming? Not nearly as much. Most of his stuff that's positioned away is these pleasure domes, this power production, so it's really just this aluminum tile costing Qubit the fuel. That said, he might want to consider shutting that down, as aluminum just isn't all that valuable. But it might spike again at some point. You never know. So we'll just have to see what happens moving forward. More nukes raining down on Pops Your Socks. This time it's going to hit that medium water, push it down to trace. Of course, always better to nuke those medium waters than those highs. Maybe a bit of a mispositioned goon squad out of Pops Your Socks here. Assuming that your opponents know what they're doing, there always should be nuking your mediums. And so it's something that you got to consider if you want to defend that medium or defend that high. And this time, Qubit goes after the medium as the correct decision. Alright, so Dermis tried to get aggressive against Space Oddity, maybe as an attempt to kind of catch back up into this game. Maybe he's feeling a little bit behind. He can't quite push to 5 very effectively. He's just unsure of where to go. So he tries to kill off the weakened player. Unfortunately, Space Oddity's already kind of purchased up all of her stock, and Dermis just isn't really set up in a position to finish things off. Now, Pops Your Socks, on the other hand, he's looking pretty darn threatening at this point. HQ5 already, decent production down, power still going adequately, chemicals are still pretty strong. Of course, he's been hacking those up the whole time. Moving into slant drilling, already picked up carbon scrubbing, definitely going to be helping him out long term this game, as there were no scavengers to drive that carbon price down. And all the carbon on the map, was there any carbon on the map in the first place? I don't know if I even checked that ever. No, all the carbon on the map is indeed dry ice. Now, Space Oddity has taken a number of aluminum tiles that are also dry ice tiles, and I like that decision. Certainly I can get behind that. I mean, dry ice is probably going to be pretty strong for these other players, but Pops Your Socks, you got to give him credit for identifying carbon scrubbing as such a valuable patent to take immediately. I definitely like that play. Also moves into slant drilling, definitely going to be very nice to see. And man, dry ice maps, you don't see them very often, but they can really get you if you aren't paying attention. We do have other patent labs down at this point with Dermis, who is trying to move into teleportation at this moment. I can definitely get behind that. He is shipping a number of resources. We talked about his massive fuel consumption earlier, right? So Dermis is going to be trying to cut that down by getting this teleportation going. It'll be done in a couple of seconds, and we can just watch the drop in consumption gradually going to be happening from that. He's going to be moving from like 3 to 3.4 all the way down to no consumption of fuel very, very rapidly. More underground nukes being targeted, this time at Dermis from Pops Your Socks. Everybody wants to control that water market. A reasonable decision. There is not a lot of water on this map and not a lot of other things to nuke, so I kind of like the decision. Always makes Offworlds more interesting when your life support prices are being driven sky high, but I don't know how that's going to work out this game. Space Oddity getting aggressive against Pop Your Socks actually forces Pop Your Socks to go ahead and buy up a couple of his own shares. A bit of an odd decision, I would say. No real reason to be afraid of Space Oddity just yet. It does slow Pops Your Socks down, but that means that he's just likely now to be paying a bit more attention to Space Oddity, and I expect her to get knocked out of the game very quickly. And of course, because it will be a full buy rather than a majority buy, not only does Pops Your Socks get a scientific player under his belt, which is always a nice thing to have, they've already got dry ice set up, and so that's pretty decent to take over. Reasonable power production. I mean, scientists are always kind of nice to acquire because they don't consume resources. Going to be a good thing for him. And of course, there are the simple 2 extra claims that Pops Your Socks will acquire, in addition to the large stock boost from owning so much of another player. Okay. Tile auction for low water going on right now. That's just a bit of an odd one, I have to say. 16,000 auction there. Gonna go on over to Dermis. Everybody finding that valuable enough to fight over, it looks like, even though nobody had elected to take it just yet. And suddenly Pops Your Socks with that carbon scrubbing slant drilling is looking to be in a really strong spot. Of course, slant drilling, it is worth pointing out, counters the previous underground nuke that hit his water tile. And I don't know if slant drilling, I think it hadn't come down at that point when the underground nuke came down, but of course it very effectively counters the nuke by saying, alright, well now both of them are just using the high tile. And that would be the argument in favor of the underground nuke landing on the high, is that then they would both be mediums instead of both being highs. But I'd say if the opponent picks up slant drilling, then the nuke isn't worth it in the first place, just to force a medium and a medium instead of a high and a medium. I think going for that big hit and forcing the slant drilling out is still likely going to be the correct decision. Pops Your Socks has managed to finish his buy onto Space Oddity. A very nice pickup for him. Going to be making a fair amount of money from that. Not a huge amount at any point, but of course the stock price boost and the 2 extra claims are always going to be super, super valuable. We can see Pops Your Socks, he's expanding into a little bit more electronics production on the back of that. That's going to be nice for him to have. And still, this hacker array sitting around for Pops Your Socks, not really doing much with it, unfortunately. Now I would like to see him potentially hacking up chems. There's some chems consumption going on. Not a huge amount of production. Could be pretty easy to shut all that down. And Pops Your Socks, though, he has moved into a couple of optimization centers himself. That makes everything a bit more awkward. Maybe electronics would be a good thing to hack up and try and control that market. But he's really in the driver's seat for this game, and everybody else is just kind of trying to hold on. Cubit's gotten into his own optimization centers at this point. Going to be trying to use those to catch up just a little bit. Let's see. He's got water, fuel, carbon, and chems all set up already. Cubit did also move into some close dry ice, as has Dermis. Everybody kind of identifying, man, carbon got ridiculous. And of course, Pops Your Socks continuing to completely ignore that market with his carbon scrubbing. I definitely like that decision out of him. Let's see, Pops Your Socks, also the only player to have moved into an off-world market at this point. Is worth noting that unlike our other games today, at least some of them, there are no holograms, even though there are spies. And so, of course, that kind of makes the off-world market really, really vulnerable when you put it down. If it's not goon squatted, people are going to see the market, and they're going to be able to know about that goon squad. So you can see that Pops Your Socks with this undefended off-world market, it is likely going to have a fair amount of aggression targeted at it. But thankfully for him, there aren't a large number of tools this game to go after the off-world market with. Just the mutiny and the power surge. It looks like Dermis was starting to store up mutinies. He's got one ready to go, as well as his black market cooldown all set. I would expect to see him start getting aggressive against this building very, very soon. But we'll just have to see exactly what happens as we move into the rest of this game. Pops Your Socks has decided to get aggressive against Cubit, which is fair enough. Cubit and Dermis are actually pretty equally dangerous, I would say, though. They're both expansive. Cubit is the one who has started an off-world market. Dermis also has one started now, though, so it's just kind of like, kind of an awkward decision to have to make. Cubit and Dermis, they both have kind of similar amounts of cash. Dermis has, let's see, not a lot of tech going on, but he does have the tech building down, but he has the patents up. It's kind of a difficult decision for Pops Your Socks. If I were him, I likely would have waited around a little bit, tried to scope out who was going to make the better investments long term, and then make that decision. But I can't fault him for going ahead and getting aggressive in a position where he feels comfortable. On the other hand, when you've got this kind of massive advantage, it could be to your advantage to just go ahead and focus entirely on yourself, right? You just stick to yourself, buy up your own stock, discourage the other two players from getting aggressive against you together by doing that. And then once they've started getting aggressive against each other, trying to get an advantage, then you just sweep in and clean up, right? That was definitely an option this game. Pops Your Socks, though, he's going to be getting aggressive from the outset. And he has such a massive lead, this will probably work out anyway. It is unlikely that Cubit plus Dermis together will be able to do anything about this, especially because of the fact that Dermis was buying into his own stock. What likely needed to happen here was have Cubit buy up Pops Your Socks stock as fast as he could. Have Dermis then try and go for the finishing buyout, as Dermis would have more money and would have an easier time getting that done, quite possibly. Let's see, Dermis has gotten aggressive with the mutinies against Pops Your Socks. But once again, with chemicals being so ridiculously expensive, and Dermis and Cubit continuing to drive up these chemical prices despite the high carbon price and the carbon scrubbing of their opponent, it really, really makes for an awkward situation this game. I really don't like their moves into optimization centers. I think those were poor decisions overall. The patent lab I'm kind of okay with because it came down earlier. Patents are kind of this one-time boost that can be very, very beneficial. Teleportation was super important for Dermish. Cubit, on the other hand, he really needed virtual reality to work with his pleasure domes, try and make that happen. But they've just been competing with each other too much this game and throwing too much money at Pops Your Socks. They both, I think, needed the immediate boost to be able to counteract Pops Your Socks, while he went into the long-term boost to try and bring him down, because just playing the long game against a player with a straight advantage over you, with the stronger founding location, the faster upgrades, the better patents, so on and so forth from there, is just never going to work. You're just playing into his hands, right? And so they've left Pops Your Socks in an absolutely fantastic position and are going to have a real hard time fighting against it, even if Cubit manages to get these last two stock, which cost a ridiculous amount of money, like $250,000-ish is what he would have to pay for that. He doesn't have that yet. He's only halfway there. And that's in all of his potential capital. Just floating, he's not even that, right? Dermis would then need a truly insane amount of money. I believe about, at that stage, he would need, I think, around $900,000 to actually finish off Pops Your Socks, once all the different factors are considered, because he needs to pay more because he doesn't own the initial stock, and there's just some math that goes into that. I think it would end up being around $900,000 or so that Dermis would have to pay to actually get the killing blow, and he's only about halfway to that. Meanwhile, Pops Your Socks this whole time is pushing to his buy on Cubit, and he's almost there. Only needs about 10,000 more. And he's going to get a lot of that very, very quickly through this electronics shortage. You can see that he's already now pushed to enough floating total that he can finish this off. It's unlikely he'll do it immediately. He's going to have to sell down some electronics, for example. Cubit likely going to be paying down as much debt as he can to try and hold on consistently. But unfortunately for him, he just couldn't get it done. And Cubit does get knocked out after Pops Your Socks sells down after the electronics shortage has completed. That means that we're left in a very awkward position with Pops Your Socks owning almost all of his own stock, all of Cubit's stock, most of Space Oddity's stock, and one of Dermis' stock, while Dermis has most of his own stock and pretty much the reverse of everything Pops Your Socks has. Or the remainder of everything, except for what Pops Your Socks has. Pops Your Socks without a whole lot of cash, but once again, we look at the stock price difference. Dermis needs a truly insane amount of money to finish this game up. Somewhere in the vicinity of $1 million or so. Whereas he only has about 300,000 at this point. Pops Your Socks, on the other hand, he is not going to need quite that much cash. He still needs a lot. But he definitely has a subsidiary advantage. Cubit with the one Offworld online. That's going to be playing into Pops Your Socks' favor. Pops Your Socks still has this big giant patent advantage potentially with slant drilling. And all the water that he's collecting is going to be absolutely fantastic. Got that electronics production, got it reasonably well upgraded. We can go ahead and look at where upgrades sit. A lot of upgrades here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 upgrades, I do believe, for Pops Your Socks, whereas Dermis, he's only sitting on 6. So that's definitely a little bit awkward for Dermis. That said, Dermis has managed to push to the 5 of Pops Your Socks. So now he needs 845,000 to finish this game up. Pops Your Socks, on the other hand, he only needs about 600,000. You guys can all see where this is going pretty easily. Players are now about equal in cash. Small lead to Dermis of about $70,000, except Offworld launches. Keep shifting that back and forth, but Pops Your Socks definitely making money more effectively on World, I would say. His electronics production is just plain better. He's got the subsidiaries in his favor. The Space Oddity subsidiary never turned into anything that was all that valuable. Stuck on HQ4, not particularly great territory. The Carbon eventually fell off, not really utilizing the scientific advantage very effectively. And all of this means that it's just a small matter of time until Pops Your Socks cleans this game up, trying to use the hacker array to accelerate things a bit. I don't think this hack actually has time to go off, but we can go ahead and see exactly what happens. But it would be nice if Pops Your Socks went ahead and identified, hey, I could just sell out now and finish the game. There it is. Pops Your Socks. Buyouts on everybody once again for him. That is 5 points. 5 points on over to Pops Your Socks for our round 3 in Group A match. Very nicely done.